Commerce Alive today presents
Mercury. During the mid-1930s, under the leadership of Edsel Ford, son of Henry Ford, the Ford Motor Company discovered that it needed to expand its brand footprint to match its largest competitors. In 1935, Ford offered only its namesake brand and the cars of its more expensive luxury vehicles of its Lincoln Motor Company division. In contrast to the comprehensive line of brands available from General Motors and the Chrysler Corporation, Ford offered its Ford Standard/Deluxe V8 range and the Lincoln Model K. In contrast to the Ford V8, the Model K was among the most expensive vehicles built and sold then in the United States, rivaled in price by the Cadillac V12, Duesenberg Model J, and the flagship lines of the Germans Mercedes-Benz and the British of Rolls-Royce. To address the gap between Ford and Lincoln, Ford Motor Company launched its own version of the late 1920s General Motors companion make program, leading the company to expand from 2 nameplates to 5 by the end of the decade. For 1936, Lincoln Zephyr was introduced as a submarque of Lincoln, giving the line a V12 car competing against the LaSalle and Buick, plus the notable revolutionary streamlining style of the Chrysler Airstream and the Airflow, along with the Packard 120. For 1938, Deluxe Ford became a submarque of Ford, offering a higher-price V8 car with a model-specific interior and exterior trim. In 1937, Edsel Ford began work on Mercury as a completely new brand, personally selecting the Roman god's name from over 100 options in spite of the name having been used just 4 years earlier for the Chevrolet Mercury and no fewer than 7 separate failed automobile companies from 1903 to 1923. In November 1938, Edsel Ford introduced 4 body styles of the Mercury 8 at the New York Auto Show. Along with a 2-door sedan and a 4-door sedan, the Mercury was also introduced as a 2-door convertible and a 2-door trunk sedan. The body design was overseen by E.T. Bob Gregory. While similar in concept to the modestly restyled Deluxe Ford, the V8-powered Mercury was an all-new car sized between the V8 Ford and the V12 Lincoln Zephyr. For 1939, the Mercury was launched at a starting price of $916. Over 65,800 vehicles were sold in the inaugural model year. In response to the popularity of the model line, Ford revised its branding structure after 1940. Deluxe Ford was discontinued as a submarque, returning to its previous use as a Ford trim line, and all Lincolns became derived from the Lincoln Zephyr, including the Continental, as Lincoln retired the Model K. For 1941, the Mercury underwent its first redesign. In another change, the model line adopted the Mercury 8 nameplate used in sales literature. To consolidate development and production, the Mercury 8 shared much of its body shell with Ford, distinguished by its 4-inch longer wheelbase. To further separate the 2 model lines, the 8 was given a model-specific grille, exterior and interior trim, and tail lamps. For the first time, a decorative wood-bodied station wagon, later nicknamed as a Woody, was offered by the brand. Unlike Ford products where components originated from the Ford River Rouge complex outside Detroit, Michigan and shipped in knockdown kits to dozens of cities across the United States, all Mercury vehicles only originated completely assembled from River Rouge until 1952, when Wayne Stamping Assembly Company started production and was the only location that created Mercury components, which were sent to only 3 cities that had dedicated assembly branch factories that completed Mercury vehicles until 1960. This approach was also used for Lincoln vehicles, which only originated from the Lincoln Motor Company plant until 1958, when Wixom Assembly Plant replaced the old Lincoln plant and completed assembly and became the component location for all Lincoln vehicles and the Ford Thunderbird, and sent knockdown kits to selected branch locations in the United States. For 1942, Mercury implemented several changes to the 8. As part of an interior redesign, the 8 received a dashboard configured similar to the Lincoln Zephyr. For the first time, the flathead V8 was offered with 100 horsepower in standard form. To compete with fluid drive and Hydra-Matic, the 1942 Mercury offered Liqui-Matic, the first semi-automatic transmission offered by Ford Motor Company. Shared with Lincoln, Liquimatic proved complex and unreliable, with many systems replaced by conventional manual transmissions. As production was suspended following the outbreak of World War II, Ford produced only 24,704 1942 Mercury vehicles. Following the rise of Henry Ford II at Ford Motor Company in September 1945, the divisional structure of the company underwent further change. On October 22, 1945, Ford merged Mercury with Lincoln Motor Company, creating the combined Lincoln-Mercury Division, 15, while functioning as a single entity. Lincoln-Mercury would continue to market both namesake model line. The Lincoln Zephyr re-entered production following the war, dropping the Zephyr nameplate. The Continental ended production after 1948. On November 1, 1945, the first 1946 Mercury vehicles rolled off the assembly line. In line with Lincoln and Ford and virtually all American manufactured vehicles. 1946 production was functionally unchanged from 1942. The 8 underwent several minor revisions, including the return of vertically oriented grille trim. As few were installed before the 1942 suspension of production, Mercury did not return the Liquimatic transmission option. Alongside the wood-paneled station wagon, Mercury introduced a wood-bodied Sportsman convertible. For 1947 and 1948, few major changes were made. The rare Sportsman convertible was dropped for 1947 and the hubcaps were restyled. 1948 Mercurys were effectively carryover. In 1949, Ford Motor Company launched its first all-new post-war designs for all 3 of its model lines. In contrast to the 1941 to 1948 Mercury, the 1949 redesign placed Mercury and Lincoln within a common body shell. Largely distinguished by headlight and grille designs, Mercury and Lincoln would also feature separately trimmed interiors. Mechanically, Ford, Lincoln, and Mercury each offered a separate version of the Ford Flathead V8. For many years after its production, the 1949 to 1951 Mercury 8 would develop a following as a street rod, making an appearance in several films. The 1949 redesign of the Mercury model line proved successful, with the division increasing its sales 6-fold over 1948, becoming the 6th most popular brand in the United States. In contrast to competing medium-price brands from Chrysler and General Motors and independents including Nash, Hudson, or Packard, Mercury continued to offer the 8 as its sole model line. For 1950, the Monterey name made its first appearance, denoting a special edition of 2-door coupes alongside the Lincoln Lido and Ford Crestliner. Intended to compete against the hardtop coupes from General Motors, the Monterey simulated the appearance of a convertible through the use of a canvas or vinyl roof. During the year, the 1 millionth Mercury vehicle was produced. In 1951, Mercury regained an automatic transmission option, with the Merkomatic 3-speed automatic, a rebranding of Ford Cruise-O-Matic. For 1952, Mercury redesigned its model line, with 2 nameplates replacing the 8. The Monterey returned as a distinct model line, slotted above the base trim custom, both shared bodies with Lincoln. In 1953, the expansion of the model line proved successful. After emerging from a war-depressed market, Mercury nearly doubled in sales, ranking 8th. While Mercury would have subsequently higher yearly sales, at 5%, this is the largest market share ever held by the division. For 1954, Ford replaced the long-running Flathead V8 with an overhead valve Y-block V8, with Ford and Mercury receiving their own versions of the engine. As a submodel of the standard Monterey hardtop, the Monterey Sun Valley was introduced, featuring a fixed-panel acrylic glass sunroof. While offering an open-air interior, the Sun Valley was difficult to market in warm-weather climates. In 1955, Mercury underwent a redesign of its model line. While again sharing much of its body shell with Lincoln, the division adopted the 3-model range of Ford. As its premium model range, the Montclair was introduced above the Monterey, including the Sun Valley Glasstop hardtop, for its final year. The revision proved successful, as Mercury reached its then highest sales. The divisional structure of Ford was revised. Lincoln-Mercury was split largely to accommodate the formation of the Continental Division in 1956. Mercury renamed the Custom the Medalist to avoid confusion with the Ford Custom. For 1957, Mercury redesigned its model range, with a 122-inch wheelbase sized between Ford and Lincoln. In a move upmarket, the slow-selling Medalist was discontinued, with the Monterey becoming the base model Mercury. Previewed by the 1956 XM800 concept car, the Turnpike Cruiser, the pace car of the 1957 Indianapolis 500, was slotted above the Montclair, distinguished by its quad headlamps and retractable rear window. In line with Ford, Mercury station wagons became a distinct model line, with the Commuter, Voyager, and Colony Park. All Mercury station wagons were hardtops. In 1958, to accommodate the introduction of Edsel, Ford revised its divisional structure, with Mercury, Edsel, and Lincoln forming a combined division. The Edsel Citation and Edsel Corsair shared their chassis with Mercury, with the entire division overlapping Mercury in price, a key reason behind its failure. The Park Lane was introduced as a flagship model line on a 125-inch wheelbase. Shared with Lincoln, Mercury introduced a 430 cubic inches Marauder V8, optional on all Mercurys. A 400 horsepower Super Marauder version became the first mass-produced engine to be rated at 400 horsepower. For 1959, Mercury underwent a revision of its body, expanding to a 126-inch wheelbase. Coinciding with the discontinuation of the Edsel Corsair and Citation, Mercury produced its own body and chassis. The division paired several slow-selling model lines, including the Turnpike Cruiser and Voyager. The two-door Commuter was in its final year. Mercury was one of the first American full-size cars to adopt parallel-action windshield wipers. As with many medium-price brands, the Mercury brand was hit hard by the economy of the late 1950s. While remaining eighth in sales from 1957 to the end of the decade, Mercury saw a 60% drop in sales in 1958, outranked by Rambler. While outselling the heavily marketed Edsel by over a 2-to-1 margin, it would take nearly 1958 and 1959 combined to match the 1957 sales total. While affecting the American automotive industry as a whole, the economic recession of the late 1950s had the harshest impact upon medium-priced brands. Though Edsel was quietly discontinued early in the 1960 model year, the future of Lincoln-Mercury remained at risk, as Lincoln had lost over $60 million from 1958 to 1960. To end the financial losses, several Ford executives led by Ford President Robert McNamara proposed restructuring Ford down to its namesake division. McNamara, prior to leaving Ford to become Secretary of Defense, allowed the Lincoln-Mercury Division to remain under several conditions. Lincoln reduced its model line from 3 to 1, with the all-new Lincoln Continental offering a much smaller exterior footprint. To establish model continuity, the brand shifted to a 9-year model cycle. With the closure of Edsel, Mercury was to share its body with Ford. In place of the 5 divisional bodies produced in 1958, Ford produced 2 for 1961. For 1960, the division released the Comet brand, its first compact car line. Originally developed for Edsel, the Comet was a divisional counterpart of the Ford Falcon. Styled with 4 headlights, the Comet was also fitted with wide tail fins. Coinciding with its Edsel origins and concerns about potential negative impacts of compact cars on the Mercury brand, the Comet was sold as a standalone product until the brands merged for the 1962 model year. Vehicle identification plaques of 1960 and 1961 models read, "Made in USA by Comet." For 1961, Mercury released an all-new full-size range, dropping the Mercury exclusive chassis in favor of sharing a chassis with the Ford Galaxy. Though visibly sharing front doors with the Galaxy, the Mercury derived multiple elements of its styling from its 1960 predecessor. The Montclair and Park Lane were dropped in favor of the wider-selling Monterey. The commuter and Colony Park station wagons returned. Slotted below the Monterey, the Mercury Meteor was a model line inherited from the closure of Edsel. As the Monterey matched the Ford Galaxy, the Meteor was a counterpart of the Fairlane. 1961 also brought the first six-cylinder engine to the brand. The 1961 Meteor 600 featured a standard mileage maker inline 6. For 1962, Mercury brought its model range closer in line with Ford. The Meteor, after only 1 year of sale, was reintroduced as an all-new intermediate range again following the design of the Ford Fairlane. For non-station wagons, Mercury introduced S submodels to market sportier content. Along with higher performance powertrains, the option packages included full-length floor consoles, floor shifters, and bucket seats with the S22, S33, and S55. For 1963, the Monterey was designed with 2 different rooflines for each body configuration. The standard design was a breezeway reverse slant rear window, offered on all versions. Introduced as a mid-year option, the Marauder fastback roofline was introduced for 2-door sedans, and hardtops 4 doors were added in 1964. Shared with the Ford Galaxy 500 XL, the aerodynamically sleeker roofline helped Mercury gain ground in stock car racing. By the middle of the decade, the fate of Mercury was no longer entangled with the failure of Edsel, with a secure future competing against Buick and Oldsmobile, the middle of the Chrysler range, and the top of the American Motors range. For 1964, the Montclair and Park Lane were reintroduced while the S models were dropped. For 1965, the full-size line underwent a complete redesign. Though again derived from the Ford Galaxy, the Monterey, Montclair, Park Lane adopted many styling elements from Lincoln, with Mercury marketing the line as built in the Lincoln tradition. For 1966, the Comet became the counterpart of the Ford Fairlane. After a 2-year hiatus, the S55 returned as a distinct higher performance variant of the Monterey. In a design change, the fastback Marauder roofline was discontinued. The breezeway design was dropped in 1967. In 1967, Mercury debuted its 2 most successful and longest-running nameplates, the Mercury Cougar and Mercury Marquis. The Cougar was developed to bridge the gap between the Ford Mustang and the Ford Thunderbird, while the Marquis offered the division a competitor toward sedan lines such as the Buick Electra, Oldsmobile 98, and Chrysler New Yorker. For 1967, the Marquis was available as a formal roof 2-door hardtop. The Mercury Park Lane Brougham was offered as flagship Mercury 4-door sedan/hardtop. In various forms, the Marquis nameplate would be used by Mercury until its 2011 closure. For 1968, the Mercury model range underwent 2 revisions to its intermediate range. The Mercury Montego, based on the Ford Torino, was gradually phased in to replace the Comet dropped after 1969. The performance-oriented Mercury Cyclone became a standalone model range, slotted above the Cougar. To further establish the brand in motorsport, the aerodynamically optimized Cyclone Spoiler 2 was homologated as the 1969 Mercury entry for NASCAR. For 1969, the full-size Mercury line was given an all-new body and chassis. The nameplates were again revised, with the Marquis becoming a full model range and the Colony Park as the only Mercury full-size station wagon. To differentiate the Marquis from the Monterey, Mercury introduced hidden headlights for the former. Replacing the S55, the Mercury Marauder became a standalone full-size 2-door, competing against the Oldsmobile Toronado and Buick Riviera. An optional 429 cubic inch V8 was offered. Though still sharing its chassis with the Mustang, the Cougar was configurable as either a pony car, personal luxury coupe, or a muscle car, with an Eliminator performance package featuring an available 428 Cobra Jet V8. During the 1970s, the product line of the Mercury Division was influenced by several factors that affected all American nameplates. While sporty cars would not disappear from the division, Mercury refocused itself further on its original purpose, building vehicles upmarket from Ford. For 1977, Mercury made significant revisions to improve sales to its intermediate model range. While technically a mid-cycle model update, the Montego was renamed the Cougar, as the model line a counterpart of the renamed Ford Limited 2 added two-door and four-door sedans and a station wagon for the first time. The previous Cougar XR7 also was updated and now paired with the redesigned Ford Thunderbird. For the next 2 decades, the two model lines would share a common design. The change from Montego to Cougar was well received, as sales of the model line nearly tripled. While V8 engines were now optional on some Buick and Oldsmobile model lines, the Grand Marquis remained with a standard 460 cubic inch V8, the second largest displacement engine used in an American automobile. 1978 began a transition of the Mercury line that would lead into the 1980s. The Mercury Zephyr Compact replaced the outdated Comet as a version of the Ford Fairmont. The Zephyr was an inaugural model line of the Fox platform, a chassis architecture that would underpin multiple vehicles from all 3 Ford divisions from the 1970s into the early 2000s. Lincoln-Mercury ended importations of the Capri 2 in late 1977, shortly before the introduction of the Ford Capri Mk3, with leftover stock sold as 1978 vehicles. Of the 580,000 vehicles sold, 1 out of every 10 1978 Mercurys were Cougars. For 1979, Ford Motor Company released its downsized full-size model lines. As American brands had shifted away from muscle cars at the beginning of the decade, the fuel crises of 1973 and 1979 had also sparked the decline of the land yacht. Introduced 2 years after the redesign of the General Motors B-body and C-body lines, Ford introduced the all-new Panther platform for a smaller Marquis/Grand Marquis. Though smaller than the Cougar sedan in its exterior footprint, the 1979 Marquis gained interior space over its 1978 predecessor. The Capri made its return, becoming a Mercury brand vehicle. Instead of a captive import, the model line was now a version of the Ford Mustang hatchback, both adopting the 1978 Fox platform. Bolstered by the redesign of the Marquis and the popularity of Cougar XR7, the Mercury brand reached its all-time sales peak, with nearly 670,000 vehicles sold. As Lincoln-Mercury entered the 1980s, Mercury continued the renewal of its model line, redesigning its entire lineup between 1978 and 1982. Since the early 1960s, the continued use of platform sharing had left Ford and Mercury model lines move towards exteriors that held little visible brand differentiation between certain vehicles. Some model lines were distinguished primarily by grilles, wheels, badging, and other minor trim. Though the practice maximized production resources, it had largely removed much previous identity held by the nameplate. Through the 1980s, designers sought to change course by re-establishing a brand identity for Mercury while continuing to maximize production resources through platform sharing. Initially associated with full-size sedans and personal luxury cars, Mercury began to diversify its model offerings. For 1980, Mercury downsized the Cougar, erasing the previous size overlap between it and the Marquis. Pared down to the XR7 coupe, the Cougar was redesigned alongside the Ford Thunderbird as a long-wheelbase version of the Zephyr. Poorly received by critics and buyers, sales of the model line collapsed to less than 1/3 of 1,979 levels. Struggling to compete against newer competitors, the aging Bobcat and Monarch were both discontinued at the end of the model year. 1981 saw several model changes, largely in response to falling sales. To replace the Monarch, Mercury introduced a Cougar 2-door and 4-door sedan as its version of the redesigned Ford Granada. The non-XR7 Cougar was largely a Zephyr with a formal roofline and Marquis-influenced fascias. As in 1977, the rebranding nearly doubled Cougar sales. The first front-wheel drive Mercury, the Mercury Lynx, was a version of the Ford Escort world car. Offering the first diesel engine for a Mercury, the Lynx was produced as a 3-door and 5-door hatchback and as a 5-door station wagon. For the first time, Mercury used its GS and LS trim nomenclature. In various forms, it would be used through the 2011 model year. In 1982, Mercury introduced the Mercury LN7, the first two-seat Mercury. The LN7 was derived from the Ford EXP. To distinguish the model line, the LN7 was fitted with a compound curve window for its hatchback. The Zephyr wagon was discontinued, replaced by a Cougar station wagon, as Mercury sought to shift the wagon upward in price. In place of the previous 4.2L V8, the Capri RS received the 5.0L V8 of the Mustang GT. 1983 saw a major model revision within Ford and Mercury, involving both full-size and mid-size model lines. The mid-size Fox platform lines underwent a mid-cycle model revisions, with Cougar sedans and wagons taking on the Marquis nameplate. As the Ford Granada became the LTD, the Grand Marquis became a distinct model line, having become the most popular full-size Mercury since 1979 alongside the Ford LTD Crown Victoria. The Cougar XR7 underwent a complete redesign of the exterior, adopting a far sleeker body than its 1980 predecessor. While the Thunderbird was styled with a fastback roofline, the Cougar received a formal notchback roofline. The Capri underwent a visible change to its rear roofline, as it adopted a compound curve window for its lift gate. Selling far under sales projections, less than 5,000 were sold for 1983. The two-seat LN7 was withdrawn in favor of its Ford counterpart. Buoyed by Cougar sales, Mercury was the fifth highest-selling brand in the United States for 1983. For 1984, Mercury further updated its model range. Replacing the Zephyr, the front-wheel drive Mercury Topaz Compact was introduced alongside the Ford Tempo, competing against the GM J cars introduced for 1982. Sharing chassis underpinnings with the Escort/Lynx on a longer wheelbase, the Topaz was developed as a sedan. As with the Thunderbird/Cougar, the Tempo/Topaz advanced the use of aerodynamically enhanced exterior design. The 1984 Topaz became the first Lincoln-Mercury vehicle to offer a driver-side airbag. The new model line also marked the debut of the Mercury stacked angle emblem. In various forms, it would be used through the 2011 model year. The change from Zephyr to Topaz proved successful, with all of Mercury selling nearly 500,000 vehicles. 1985 saw few revisions to the Mercury model line, largely in preparation for 1986. For the first time since 1980, the Cougar received a complete redesign of its interior, including an electronic instrument panel. As a 1985 one-half model, the Lynx underwent a mid-cycle update, adopting flush headlamps and a black-painted grille in line with the Topaz. The Marquis, which shared much of its interior with the 1980 Cougar XR7, underwent minor exterior and badging revisions. Intending to repeat the success of the 1970s Capri, Lincoln-Mercury began sales of the Merkur, a captive import from West Germany aimed at European entry-level luxury cars. In 1986, Mercury made a substantial change to its mid-size lines, as the Mercury Sable was phased in to replace the Marquis. Along with introducing its first six-passenger front-wheel drive car, Mercury was replacing its conservative Marquis with one of the most aerodynamic sedans in the world. Though sharing most of its body with the Taurus, the Sable adopted a number of its own visible design elements, with blacked-out C-pillars, vertically slotted tail lamps, semi-skirted rear fenders, and the introduction of a low-wattage, light-bar grille. Additionally, the Sable served as the design basis of the Taurus/Sable station wagon. To match the Sable, the 1986 Topaz underwent a minor exterior update, receiving composite headlamps and a light-bar grille. The Marquis remained in production through the end of the 1985 calendar year, with Mercury marketing both mid-size lines concurrently. 1987 saw Mercury revise its model lines in a move upmarket. The Cougar underwent an extensive mid-cycle revision, sharing only the doors with the 1986 body. In a break from the Thunderbird Turbo Coupe, the Cougar XR7 was fitted with a standard 5.0L V8 engine. The Capri was discontinued, though more popular than the 1980 XR7. The 1986 model line was outsold nearly 10-1 by the Ford Mustang. The Mercury Tracer was released to replace the Lynx for 1988, becoming the first Mercury assembled outside of North America. The first Mercury since 1960 with no Ford equivalent in North America, the Tracer was derived from the Ford Laser. American production was sourced from Japan and Mexico, while Canadian production was imported from Taiwan. For 1988, Mercury underwent multiple product revisions and updates. For the first time since 1979, the Grand Marquis underwent an externally substantial update to slightly improve its aerodynamics. The rarely produced two-door sedan was withdrawn. The Topaz sedan was redesigned, adopting a more notchback rear roofline than the Tempo. A grille replaced the light bar. The Tracer line was expanded in the United States by the addition of a station wagon. 1989 saw the 50th anniversary of the Mercury Division, producing various commemorative editions of the Cougar, Sable, and Grand Marquis. For the third time since 1980, the Cougar underwent a ground-up redesign, with the model line adopting an all-new chassis alongside the Thunderbird. Growing significantly in wheelbase, the Cougar was benchmarked in design against European premium luxury coupes. The Sable saw a minor update, a revision to the bumper and light bar to aid grille ventilation. The front parking lamps became clear. Far under sales projections, Lincoln-Mercury ended sales of the Merkur brand. For 1995, the Mercury Mystique was introduced to replace the long-running Topaz sedan. The Topaz Coupe was not replaced. A counterpart of the Ford Contour, the Mystique was developed from the Ford Mondeo World Car, introduced in 1992. While the Mondeo was developed as a mid-size car in Europe, in North America, the Contour/Mystique fell closer in size to compact-size sedans, leading to negative receptions for small interior dimensions. The Grand Marquis underwent a mid-cycle revision, along with minor updates to the exterior. The interior was redesigned. For 1996, the Sable underwent its second redesign. Though again derived from the Ford Taurus, the Sable grew further apart in design from its counterpart, with the two model lines sharing little more externally besides the front doors. The heavily rounded exterior was poorly received by both critics and buyers, leading for sales of the Sable to fall by one-third from 1996 to 2000. For 1997, Mercury debuted a new generation of the Tracer. Though using the Mazda design chassis of the previous generation, the 1997 Tracer sedan adopted an all-new body. In contrast to the Sable, the Tracer differed from its Ford Escort counterpart only through its grille, wheels, and badging. The Mercury Mountaineer midsize SUV was introduced as the first Lincoln-Mercury SUV. Following the GM retirement of the Buick Roadmaster and Chevrolet Caprice, sales of the Grand Marquis increased nearly 20% over 1996 as the model line competed largely against the Ford Crown Victoria, itself supported primarily through sales of fleet vehicles. At the end of the model year, the Cougar Coupe was retired as sales of large two-door coupes continued to decline. For 1998, the Grand Marquis received a second mid-cycle update, restyled with a larger grille and tail lamps. In response to the 1992 to 1997 Grand Marquis receiving a better marketplace reception over its Crown Victoria counterpart, both model lines adopted the formal roofline design used by the Mercury. The Mountaineer underwent a minor revision to its front grille to further differentiate it from the Ford Explorer. For 1999, the Mercury line saw multiple major product changes. Discontinued the year before, the Cougar made its return in a far smaller and sportier form. For the first time since 1976, the Cougar was not produced alongside the Thunderbird, which remained discontinued. A second generation of the Villager was released, growing in size over its predecessor. In contrast to the Ford Windstar, a driver-side sliding door was standard equipment. The Tracer and Mystique were discontinued at the end of the model year. The latter was sold under a short run of 2000 production. For 1993, the Mercury Villager was launched as the first Lincoln-Mercury minivan. 31, completely different from the Ford Aerostar, the front-wheel drive Villager derived its name used for wood-trim Mercury station wagons. The product of a joint venture with Nissan, the Villager was produced by Ford alongside the Nissan Quest. Both model lines derived their chassis and drivetrain from the Nissan Maxima. Sized between the two sizes of Chrysler minivans, the Villager was developed as a competitor for the Chrysler Town Country and Oldsmobile Silhouette. While more successful than its Nissan counterpart, the Villager would later decline in sales, primarily in response to newer competitors. For 1997, Mercury introduced its first SUV with the Mercury Mountaineer. A segment once nearly exclusive to the Jeep Grand Wagoneer, the Mountaineer was developed in response to the Oldsmobile Bravada. Sharing its body and chassis with the Ford Explorer, the Mountaineer differed from the Explorer in its use of all-wheel drive rather than four-wheel drive. A V8 engine was standard. In a styling theme adopted on nearly all succeeding Mercury vehicles, the Mountaineer used a silver, waterfall grille with a large central Mercury emblem. After skipping the 1998 model year, the Cougar made its return for 1999 under a completely new identity. After serving as a personal luxury car since 1971, the model line was repackaged as a compact sports coupe originally developed as the third generation of the Ford Probe. The first generation produced with front-wheel drive, the 1999 Cougar adopted the chassis of the Mystique sedan, bodied as a three-door hatchback. Alongside the loss of the V8 engine, the 1999 Cougar was the first version of the model line offered solely as a Mercury. At the turn of the 21st century, Mercury began to struggle in keeping its brand image in touch with premium brand buyers. At the time, its best-selling model line was the Grand Marquis. Though its flagship sedan was among the most profitable vehicles of Ford Motor Company, the average age of its buyer was in their mid-60s, nearly 2 decades higher than what Lincoln-Mercury sought to attract into its showrooms. At the beginning of the decade, Lincoln-Mercury was made part of Premier Automotive Group, which combined all Ford Motor Company subsidiary brands under a single organizational structure. Following the 1999 revival of the Cougar as a sports coupe, Mercury underwent an extensive revision of its model line in the early 2000s. The Tracer and Mystique were discontinued during the 2000 model year. Alongside the Villager and Mountaineer, Mercury sold only the Cougar, Sable, and Grand Marquis. Each vehicle line was marketed to widely different buyers, with no common brand styling. For 2002, Ford reinstated Lincoln-Mercury as a distinct Ford division, ending its status within the PAG, which concentrated towards European Ford brands. The Mountaineer underwent its first complete redesign. While again a counterpart of the Ford Explorer, the redesign brought substantial functional upgrades. Sharing only its roofline and doors with the Explorer, the 2002 Mountaineer launched a design identity used by Mercury through the end of the 2000s, including a rectangular waterfall grille and clear lens headlamps extending into the hood. Interior chrome was largely. After the loss of the Cougar from its model lineup, Mercury launched multiple models to expand its line beyond the Sable, Grand Marquis, and Mountaineer. For 2003, the Mercury Marauder made its return as a high-performance variant of the Grand Marquis, serving as a 2000s rendition of the 1994 to 1996 Chevrolet Impala SS. Alongside the Marauder, the Grand Marquis underwent its largest model update since 1992. While the exterior and interior underwent a modest facelift, the chassis underwent a near-complete redesign to upgrade its road handling and durability. Mercury returned to the minivan segment for 2004, as it replaced the Villager with the Mercury Monterey, the first Mercury minivan produced by Ford. A counterpart of the Ford Freestar, the Monterey directly challenged the Chrysler Town Country and Oldsmobile Silhouette directly in size for the first time. In a segment first, the Monterey introduced heated/cooled front seats. During the 2005 and 2006 model years, Mercury underwent a near-complete transformation of its model line. For 2005, the Mountaineer was joined by the Mercury Mariner, a counterpart of the Ford Escape and Mazda Tribute. The Mariner was the first Mercury with a four-cylinder engine since the 2002 Cougar. The Mountaineer underwent a redesign for 2006, while largely evolutionary in exterior changes. The new generation was upgraded with many features from the discontinued Lincoln Aviator. The smaller Mariner Hybrid was introduced, serving as the first Mercury hybrid electric vehicle. The replacement of the Sable after 2005 commenced the launch of two model lines over 2 years. The 2005 Mercury Montego was the larger of the two. Serving as a counterpart of the Ford 500, while only slightly larger than the Sable, the interior of the Montego more closely matched the Grand Marquis in size. The 2006 Mercury Milan was a counterpart of the Ford Fusion, sized closely to the original 1986 Sable. As Mercury did not market a version of the Ford Freestyle, the division no longer offered a station wagon of any kind for the first time since 1940. In what would be its final exterior revision, the 2006 Grand Marquis underwent its fourth update since 1992. Though sharing common rooflines with their Ford counterparts, Mercury vehicles had transitioned into a design theme consistent across the entire model line. After 2007, Mercury ended sales of the Monterey, exiting the minivan segment for the final time. Both the Monterey and its Ford counterpart had struggled to gain market share against more established vehicles in the segment. After 21 years, Ford ended production of minivans in North America. For 2008, Mercury underwent significant revisions to its full-size sedan line. The Montego underwent a model update, becoming a revived Mercury Sable alongside the return of the Ford Taurus. The update included a more powerful drivetrain and greater styling distinction from its Ford counterpart. Alongside poor sales of the Montego in the marketplace outsold by the Grand Marquis nearly 5-1 for 2007, new company management insisted upon a nameplate with greater brand recognition. A second-generation Mariner was released, with Mercury increasing brand-specific exterior and interior design. In contrast to the rest of the Mercury line, the Grand Marquis had outsold its Ford Crown Victoria counterpart for over a decade. After 2007, Ford ended retail sales of the latter model line. During 2008, the Grand Marquis was overtaken in annual sales by the Milan as the best-selling Mercury line. In 2009, Ford began to make the final revisions to the Mercury model line, phasing out nameplates at the end of their model cycles. At the end of the model year, Mercury retired the Sable permanently, as it remained the slowest-selling Mercury sedan by a wide margin. The 2010 Ford Taurus was developed with no Mercury counterpart. The Mountaineer was retired at the end of 2010, along with its status as the slowest-selling Mercury line. The Mountaineer was not included with the release of the 2011 Ford Explorer. For 2010, Mercury released its final model update, releasing a mid-cycle revision for the Milan. Alongside a substantially revised front fascia, a Milan Hybrid was introduced as the first Mercury hybrid sedan. As part of the announced closure of Mercury in 2010, the division released a model line for a shortened 2011 model year, offering the Mariner, Milan, and Grand Marquis. Regardless of the fate of the brand, the Grand Marquis, last redesigned for 1992, had already been slated for retirement after 2011, as Ford had announced the closure of its St. Thomas assembly facility that produced the model line. After 2011, the model line was no longer legal for sale in North America, as federally mandated electronic stability control was unable to be integrated with the Ford Panther chassis that had underpinned the model line and its Ford/Lincoln counterparts since 1979. In 2008, Ford introduced an advertising campaign starring actress Jill Wagner that focused exclusively on attracting female drivers to the Mercury brand in hopes of making it more relevant and profitable. The campaign was a failure, narrowing the brand image and buyer appeal of the division even deeper, and sales continued to fall. After 2000, Ford began to phase out its practice of releasing direct Mercury counterparts of its Ford car lines. Following the retirement of the Tracer and Mystique, no version of the Ford Focus was developed as a Mercury. Later on in the decade, Ford did not develop Mercury counterparts of the Ford Freestyle/Taurus X, Ford Edge, or the Ford Flex. With the exception of the Grand Marquis, following the 1999 Cougar, which began life as a 1999 Ford Probe, each Mercury sedan/wagon and SUV was developed with a direct Ford divisional counterpart. On June 2, 2010, Ford announced the closure of the Mercury line effective at the end of 2010. The company intended to concentrate its marketing and engineering efforts on the Ford and Lincoln model lines. In terms of overall sales in North America, the Mercury brand held a 1% share compared to the 16% share of Ford. After selling under 93,000 vehicles for 2009, Mercury had sold fewer vehicles than either Oldsmobile or Plymouth prior to their discontinuation. For its two slowest-selling model lines, Mercury retired the Sable and the Mountaineer after the 2009 and 2010 model years. The two vehicles completed their model cycles without replacement. The Mariner, Milan, and Grand Marquis were produced through the end of 2010 for a shortened 2011 model year. At the time, Mercury vehicles were sold in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Middle East. For 2010, 93,165 Mercury vehicles were sold, nearly 265,000 fewer than in 2000. As Ford announced the closure of the Mercury brand, signage related to the brand began to disappear from Lincoln-Mercury dealers. To reflect the change completely, in December 2012, Ford renamed the Lincoln division as the Lincoln Motor Company. The final Mercury automobile, a 2011 Grand Marquis, was manufactured by Ford of Canada at St. Thomas Assembly on January 4, 2011. With nearly 2.8 million Marquis built, the longest produced Mercury model line was second only to the Cougar in overall sales. As of 2019, Mercury remains an active, registered trademark of Ford.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.